Tell me why the moon changes shape. Full moon over the farm. Nick was excited. He had just arrived at his grandma's farm to spend the summer there. The first night, sitting with Grandma on the porch, Nick saw a full moon. Look, he said, it's so bright tonight and it's a perfect circle. That's right, his grandma said, but we don't see a full moon all the time. Nick thought about that. I know the moon is a sphere, he said, just like the sun. You're right, she said, but we don't always see it that way. Let's keep watching the moon together. And when you notice it's changing, you can draw a little picture on my calendar. That night, Nick drew the moon as a perfect circle. He wondered how long would it stay that way and what would happen next. 29 days. A week passed. Nick realized that the moon was the shape of a half circle. That's weird, he said. What happened? The moon itself is the same size it always is, Grandma said, and the sun is still shining on half of it. What changes is how much of that sunlit part we can see. She explained that the moon orbits Earth about every 29 days. Earth is also orbiting the sun. The lighted surface of the moon will appear bigger or smaller to us depending on where the moon is in orbit. We call these different views of the moon lunar phases. Lunar means moon. How many lunar phases are there? Nick asked. That's a tricky question, Grandma said. Some people say 4 or 8 or even more. Scientists don't always agree. The moon goes missing. Soon, the moon began to rise very late at night. Nick went to sleep too early to see it, but then the moon was still there in the morning. One day, a tiny sliver of the moon was visible all day long. Grandma explained that this meant a new moon was almost here. A new moon is when the moon moves between the earth and the sun. The half facing us is completely dark. This is a normal part of the orbit? Nick asked. The moon is still up there, but without any sunlight on it? The sun is still shining on the half that's not facing us, Grandma reminded him. We can't see the moon tonight at all. She had set up an easel and was mixing some oil paints. What are you painting? Nick asked. Grandma laughed. It's a surprise. You can't see this tonight either. A few days later, Nick noticed that the moon was back at sunset. He saw a skinny, lighted edge of the moon very near the setting sun. Grandma said this was called a crescent moon and pointed out that it was lighted on the right edge. Bright, right, growing light, she said. This came true over the next 2 weeks. Nick could see more and more of the moon each night. More of the lighted side of the moon was facing the earth. Back to the beginning. Eventually, the moon looked full again. It was the same perfect circle Nick had seen the first night of his visit. Wow, Nick said. He drew in the last entry on his chart, a white circle. The moon is back where it started. But he could see that the real moon had shadowy splotches that he hadn't drawn in. What are those big gray spots? I've never gotten close enough to check, Grandma said, smiling. But I read that they are huge lakes of hardened lava. The next morning, Nick's dad came to pick him up. "See you later, my little astronomer," Grandma said. She handed him the painting she'd finished. It was Nick, staring up at a full moon.